otherwise viewed as one of his crowning achievements. But to FDR, winning the war was never enough. Convinced that the global economic hardship of the 1930s was what gave rise to fascism in Europe and Asia and sent the world spiraling toward war, he foresaw that the United States had to fashion a new post-war order out of the ruins of the present conflict. This conviction underlay his January 1941 articulation of the Four Freedoms and the crafting of the Atlantic Charter 8 months later. In short, FDR had committed himself to the establishment of a new system of international security, as called for in the last clause of the Charter, even before the United States entered the conflict. He never lost sight of this overriding ambition and, in spite of what Francis Perkins called his transcending preoccupation with the day-to-day demands of the war, always considered how each victory could be woven into a pattern of permanent peace and world organization. To a certain extent, this focus on victory and the management of the war obscured FDR's determination to use the conflict as a catalyst for the establishment of a new post-war order centered on the creation of the United Nations. There is irony in this comment, for what also makes FDR's tenure in office unique, aside from his election to 4 terms, and the fact that he remains our only wheelchair president, was his willingness to hold 2 press conferences per week for virtually his entire tenure in office, meaning that by the time he died in April 1945, he had held a stunning 998 meetings with the press. Still, a good deal of mystery still surrounds Franklin D. Roosevelt. We might borrow Winston Churchill's oft-quoted phrase about Russia to say that, in many respects, FDR remains a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. FDR rarely confided his innermost thoughts to his family, friends, and advisers. He also refused to take notes during meetings and insisted that the members of his cabinet and other senior officials do the same. Indeed, there were times when the president seemed to delight in being unreadable and unpredictable. He took great pleasure, for example, in the press's rampant speculation about whether or not he would run for a 3rd term. Speculation well symbolized by the papier-mâché sculpture of FDR as the Egyptian Sphinx that was presented to him at the annual Gridiron Dinner of December 1939. He once told a group of astonished foreign policy experts visiting the White House that he was a juggler. I never let my right hand know what my left hand does. The outstanding biographer of Roosevelt's early life, Jeffrey Ward, has speculated that FDR's reluctance to show emotion or reveal his inner feelings stemmed from a practice that he and his mother adopted to deal with his father's weak heart. James Roosevelt was 54 years old when FDR was born. As he became increasingly frail, mother and son conspired to always remain cheerful and to avoid stress or public shows of emotion so as not to upset his delicate constitution. FDR carried this outward effervescence into adulthood, often employing it, whether consciously or not, as a mask. For confirmation of this penchant for stoicism, we need only recall how FDR and his family coped with the devastating attack of polio that left him essentially paralyzed from the waist down at the prime of his life. Emotional impenetrability has its advantages, particularly for a president, but it also has its disadvantages. It can lead to feelings of isolation and, worse still, loneliness, even for a person surrounded by a large family and dozens of aides and assistants. There is no question that by the end of 1943, the big man, as Time magazine called FDR, was beginning to feel alone. By the end of 1944, the twin burdens of the presidency and the war, coupled with his growing sense of isolation, had become almost too much. FDR, in short, was exhausted, and with this exhaustion came a narrowing of his view of what was important to him, the nation, and the world. This is why a close look at the last 100 days of FDR's life and presidency is so revealing and so significant.